what do you do when you represent an industry that's already $100 billion in size? Sit back and relax, or disrupt and try to change the rules of the game? That's exactly what we're going to discuss with a very special panel joining us here at the NASSCOM Leadership Forum in Mumbai. I've got Sar Chandrasekhar, President of NASSCOM, Sar Chandrasekharan, Executive Vice Chairman at Cognizant India, Aruna Jayanthi, CEO of Capgemini, and Noshir Kaka, MD of McKinsey India. Mr. Chandrasekhar, I want to start with you. The sense one gets is that probably Indian IT sector is in a sweet spot. The other way of looking at it is that it's in a comfort zone. What do you think?
I don't think there's anything called a sweet spot or a comfort zone in a sector which changes as rapidly as the IT sector. Yes, right now the industry is looking at a more positive outlook for the year ahead. But while there are many areas of opportunity which are being looked at, both in terms of geography as well as in terms of different verticals, there is no lack of challenges either. So I don't think that there is any room for either complacency or a feeling that we are in a sweet spot and now
we'll talk about the challenges in great detail, but what is your sense? Next $100 billion, how long will it take?
I think as NASSCOM has projected, we want to be a $300 billion industry by 2020. And we already see that happening. We are on the right track. There's a lot happening in the industry. We are not sitting back and relaxing that things are okay, things all move along. We are trying to make changes. We are trying to be more innovative than what we have been in the past. And so we want to work with our clients and see how we can make a difference to their business. So you can see the urge to be different. And as we look into the future, I think we can make a big difference, and that will bring the additional $100 billion that we need for the industry.
I guess it will also help if the industry can grow at the rate at which Cognizant is growing, but that will take a while, Mr. Chandrasekhar. Well, let me switch to you, Noshir. What is your sense? Where is this growth going to come from? Is it going to come from the traditional, verticals that we've seen, like application development, maintenance, infrastructure management, or do you think the industry now needs to start looking at newer segments as well?
So very simply, Sandeep, I think if you look at two of the largest segments of this industry, which has at least 4 or 5 segments, if you just look at traditional IT services and if you look at business process, BPM, business process management, India's share, if you take all the India-centric companies, and I'll count Cognizant in that as well, the share of Indian companies relative to a global market share is today around 8%. All right. The next 100 billion, so to speak, would come from adding another 4 or 5 percentage points of market share, right? So if you look at is the headroom for growth on our existing verticals, geographies, service lines tapped out? I mean, we are less than double digits penetration today, right? Yes, some of them like ADM, our traditional ADM is more penetrated, but some like infrastructure are completely under-penetrated today. If you look at some segments like banking and insurance, they're ahead. But frankly, other massive segments like government or, education, for example, we haven't talked healthcare, which Cognizant leads in, right, is significantly under-penetrated. So I think even if you look at the international market, you just need 4 incremental points of market share. And given that the track record of, I would say, all companies out of, emerging geographies, that seems to be plausible.
But that's the risk, isn't it, Aruna? The fact that when the headroom in the traditional verticals itself is so huge, why does the industry need to innovate, to disrupt is the obvious question. But the other way of looking at it is that if you don't disrupt, you may not get to the next $100 billion quickly enough.
I think that's a good point, but what we have to see is while there is headroom, I think some of the traditional businesses are also becoming increasingly commoditized. And there will be some pressure on margins and that. So I know we are talking more about, where's the 100 billion, but you also have to watch that it's the right margins. So there will be some pressure on margins on those traditional services. And therefore, while we continue to, gain more market share in that, I think it's also important to start looking at some of the newer segments. Okay, for example, he mentioned BPM and but which is not so traditional which is not not so new anymore. But there are some areas which are relatively nascent, and I'd like to say engineering services. Today, there is a very high dependence on IT in that area. So while you think it's engineering, it's mechanical engineering and stuff like that, at the end of the day, it's all IT driven, a large part of it. And I think there's huge headroom. It's grossly under penetrated. And then finally, if you look at IP, that's the biggest, that's the, I think, big one from where the revenue push will come from as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a strong enough business case for the industry to look beyond the traditional verticals and look at new verticals, engineering services, like Aruna pointed out?
Absolutely. There are number of areas where we can offer more, which are not addressed today, and they have huge potential. So as an industry, that's why I said, we shouldn't be, sitting back and relaxing. There's so much of opportunities out there, and we need to specialize more and more, move up the value chain on the one side, really look for newer opportunities, newer areas, whether it is verticals or service lines, specialize in those and grab as much market share as possible. The opportunities are there, the market is there, and we just need to specialize more and grab as much opportunity as possible.
So what are these opportunities, and would you agree with Aruna that if you focus only on the traditional areas, then increasingly the business is getting a little commoditized, and so there will be margin pressure at some point, maybe not now, but maybe at a later stage?
Yes, not only margin pressures, but over a period of time, I think the technology trends do suggest that some of these traditional lines of business may actually disappear and be replaced by products or different ways of performing those tasks, which will cannibalize the existing business. So that is one aspect of it. The second is, as Chandra was saying, that more of looking at different areas, like little more of productization, little more of verticalization, little more of solutions on the cloud, and various opportunities surrounding that. In general, actually, greater degree of participation in accomplishing the business objectives of the clients as opposed to just the technology objectives.
The one area where there is a lot of action probably now is SMAC, social media analytics and cloud. It was probably all talk a few years ago. Now we're increasingly seeing a lot of companies invest in this vertical as well. How much more time before we can unlock the real value of this vertical, according to you?
I think it's already happening, and a lot of organizations are seeing some real solid business in that. Okay, are there deals which are, let's say, $100 million each in that one? Perhaps not yet. I think the deal sizes are smaller in that one, but there are still deals out there, and it's also the theme here at NASSCOM about crafting digital enterprise. Today, I don't think our client organizations are sitting back and saying we can't do anything about it. It is mainstream today for them. It is mainstream today for a lot of them. Some of them are doing it in a small basis, like mobile enabling a few applications, whereas some others are taking a very strategic enterprise view. But the fact is, everybody is looking at it. The question is how many of those will transition rapidly into enterprise level, strategic focus on some of these areas. And I think that's a matter of, I would think, a year at most.
A year at most? Would you agree with that, Naushad?
Sandeep, I think there's no question that SMAC today does not dominate the IT budgets today. But if you look at the share of tomorrow's budgets, it will be a massive, massive share. And I think, what's mind share today is really going to be what market share is tomorrow. If I can borrow a line from one of my colleagues, the fact is that it is a huge disruptor. And what's happening with IT, what IT has actually done to most other industries, IT and the companies are doing for themselves, right? So if you look at what is talked about in platformization or automation or cognitive computing, there is a huge portion of this industry, perhaps that exists today, will not be there in the future. There will be other forms of delivery of that same services. The opportunity is there. I think the companies and the country itself has to innovate to keep up with the challenges that technology puts in front of it.
Cognizant is, of course, investing a lot in it, and you're seeing some rewards already. But what is your assessment of how much time before this could explode, so to say?
I think it's only, it's already at a CEO level agenda. It's gone beyond IT. It's a business agenda to transform business leveraging technology. So it's already out there. Now it's a question of scaling and helping customers transform their business processes, leveraging technology. So you would see more of it, coming, and that's what has created the sense of optimism within the industry here. There's so much that we can do if only we can reinvent and continue to be at the leading edge of technology.
The other big opportunity, of course, is the domestic market, and who better to ask that than to you, Mr. Chandrasekhar? You've been Secretary in the Government of India as well. What, according to you, is, in a sense, coming in the way of this market exploding? Because everyone's been talking about it for a while now, but yet, in terms of business, it contributes so little to the Indian IT sector. And what are the triggers that could lead to this market taking off, so to say?
I think there are two separate answers. One is for the government-controlled space, which is areas where the government controls the spending. And that, to some extent, is impacted by two things. One is that we are currently in the process of an election, and government decision making has got slightly impacted. The award of projects has got delayed, and so on. And the second is in the manner in which the services are procured by the government. And I think that has been a huge challenge. And the reality is that there are big challenges in terms of the way the projects are awarded, the way that the payments are made. And the experience of industry has not been very satisfactory. So clearly, when just as we are talking about partnership in a global context, we have to actually figure out a way to accomplish that partnership in the domestic environment. And it's not made easy. It's not made any easier because of the environment of mistrust which exists today. So there are special challenges. Sure. Between the industry and the government, between the people and the government on any decisions taken. So all of these present special challenges. Outside the government, on the private sector side, a lot of these investments are related to growth and the challenges that we are facing in growth, the kind of lull that we are seeing in manufacturing, so and other problems on the economic front.
So the economy turns on that. But it must be extremely frustrating for you, heading an MNC. I'm sure Capgemini would look at India as a market with huge potential intrinsically as well. Must be very frustrating at one level.
It is certainly a good market, which is why we're all focusing on it and then investing in it to make sure it works. So, but I'm sure that the opportunity is huge, okay? And we can already see companies in the private sector, and many of them are global companies, so they recognize that if they have to compete globally, they are not looking at India alone as a market. So Indian companies, which are more global in nature, already see the need to drive these huge investments, okay? So we already see that change in the private sector, and that's a positive sign. What now needs to happen is the same thing in the government sector, where the spend will be huge there.
What are other new markets that could be driving growth, or do you think the next wave of growth will continue to come from US and Europe as it has been for a while now?
I think if you look at US, Europe,
Japan,
and potentially Japan, because everyone always believes in Japan's potential as well. But I do think that if you just look at the share of GDP spending, these geographies tend to dominate it. So will it suddenly change and become very different in terms of where the source of the spending occurs? No. But I think what actually will happen is two things. One is the innovation from India will actually be taken global. And there is no reason why innovation done in India only has to be in the emerging markets. We are actually seeing that innovation being ported to Western Europe, being ported to North America, and being ported to a whole host of other countries, right? So I think that you'll see two effects. One is India to emerging markets, which is Latin America, Africa, the whole Southeast Asia. You're going to see that opportunity open up, and it already has. The second, equally, in fact, probably larger opportunity is India to the developed world. And I think that is a huge opportunity led by innovation that, frankly, only India could do.
Sure. We've spoken about the opportunity, but let's talk about the threat as well. And I can't think of another bigger, threat other than the immigration bill. And I'm sure it's not giving you sleepless nights yet. But the sense that one gets is that it is going to be a reality. It's going to be, in the form that it currently is. Largely, there isn't much that, despite the rhetoric from the Indian side for a change, which we spoke about as well a few weeks ago, there's unlikely to be much change from the immigration bill as it is. Do you think the industry can cope with this as a new normal?
Well, first of all, it's at this point not at all clear what form this whole bill will take finally. We do have the Senate bill which was passed, but we know and we see that what is actually going to happen is something quite different. So the contours of what legislation will finally emerge are not clear. But even as these discussions and debates are going on, and the legislative process involves not only a discussion on the provisions, but a political process which sometimes is not confined to the issue at hand, but actually spans 2 or 3 issues where different processes intersect. And I'm talking about linkage between, say, immigration and something completely different from immigration. And within immigration itself, there are a whole set of issues between border security and the overall problem of immigration versus the STEM related areas. So there are many imponderables over there, and the concerns that were there and the discomfort with a number of provisions in the Senate bill imply that these concerns are not at rest today. We have taken considerable pain as an industry to put across the point of view that this is not about Indian industry or Indian STEM workers. This is as much about American competitiveness and the American companies' competitiveness in a global environment.
Sure.
And it's also about the situation in the STEM area, where you have one overall figure with regard to unemployment, but a completely different situation in the area of STEM, where there is actually a shortage of skilled workers. So these concerns have been put across, and we are hopeful that whatever comes out of this legislative process would be not only cognizant of our concerns, but to take a more balanced view of this whole equation.
But as a NASSCOM president, I guess you have to be hopeful. But what is your sense? Do you think that that industry will now get used to a new normal? To start with, aside of the immigration bill, we're already seeing a lot of local hiring. The bigger question then is that do you think the business model that we currently have of having this offshore on-site mix, do you think that business model itself is at risk, say, from 5 years, 10 years from now?
I don't know whether I would call it a risk. It is an evolution. And in the past, the on-site offshore model was the right thing because people were really looking for cost takeout. So that model worked. But customers are now pushing us for innovation. Customers are pushing us to bring thought leadership. And that has to happen only with people closer to the geography in which customers are operating. So that calls for, increased local presence. And, globally, there are various skills that are available, right? It's important as an industry that we need to tap those skills and offer a very unique value proposition. So I feel the model will evolve as you undertake more and more complex work for customers. You need to leverage the global talent and put it all together to offer a superior, customer experience, and that calls for global delivery. So the model will evolve from an on-site offshore model to a global delivery model.
So do you think the global delivery model that's so far largely been driven by a huge number of people working offshore, do you think that's set for a disruptive change in the next 5 years?
Absolutely, I think so. And I actually hope that we stop using terms like onshore, offshore, and I think it's very, very restrictive. Let me just take an analogy of, let's say, the engineering industry. Okay, if you take German engineering, it's synonymous. Okay, German engineering stands for high quality and so on, and nobody questions where it is actually manufactured. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's designed in Germany, but it's it could be manufactured anywhere in the world, and that's really, I think, what we need to aspire for India. It's Indian software. It's software designed, conceptualized, it doesn't matter. Let us go deliver it in Philippines. And I think it's also up to us to start rethinking what does really global delivery model mean. It's not onshore and offshore. Okay? We truly need to think that way. And if we can say, then you're talking IP, you're talking real value, and then it just changes the whole paradigm.
But how many Indian IT companies you think are thinking on those lines? And the fact remains that India remains a huge talent pool, when it comes to talent in the industry. Our engineering graduates probably are the best in the world. So how can this dynamic change according to you?
Well, I wouldn't call our engineering graduates the best in the world. We certainly have an extremely large pool, which we hope will get actually even better. But I'd say two things. One is, today any industry, and particularly this industry, has to have a global people supply chain, we call it, or a global talent chain, right? I completely agree with Aruna. I don't think you can say, any company, not the large companies, not the smaller companies today, would be resting on their laurels and saying, look, our old models are actually going to continue. This industry is actually disrupting its own model faster than anything. I'll give you 3 examples. One, if you're looking at actually getting into, as many of the companies are doing, into analytics, right, into understanding the end consumer's decision-making journey. You have to understand that at the consumer source, right? And therefore we are seeing tapping into talent as it occurs, right? Second is we're seeing diversification of different skill sites. Aruna mentioned Philippines, for example, right? So you're looking at different countries and different companies looking at a global people supply chain. Yes, it is true that if you look at the supply side, India tends to dominate the English-speaking talent in STEM particularly, right? And so therefore it is natural that you'd have a little bit more weight here for areas that are relevant. But I think every company, large, medium, small, startup to large, is actually looking at where can you source talent globally that is the most effective for a particular task, and I see that journey only accelerating.
You know, Naushad corrected me on India not having the best engineering talent in the world, but does that probably explain why we don't, as yet, but does that probably explain why we don't have a Facebook or, you know, or a Google out of India yet, or a company that's nowhere close to that as well?
That would, I think it's not a question of just pure talent. I mean, there's so many other factors as to, you know, the environment that we create, right from the basic education system on letting people, you know, think freely, think independently. It's also about the financial support systems that we have within the country. So I think it's a combination of factors. So maybe unfair to say it's just engineering talent.
We may not have a Facebook or Google in India, but in terms of applied R&D and coming up with innovative solutions, India will be the leader.
Would you agree with? Would you be equally optimistic?
People have now started looking around themselves and trying to spot a problem and trying to find solutions. This is something I think which Aruna was also referring to about, you know, this whole mindset that I'm only learning something rather than thinking that I'm learning something. Now, how do I apply this knowledge to problems that I see around me and apply this knowledge in a new way to solve an old problem in a new way? That is something which is happening, and I think that's the most exciting trend that is now visible.
Right. Running out of time, but I'll let you have the last word, because I think this is something that everyone in the panel will agree on. The one thing that the Indian IT sector also needs to work on is have more women leaders. I mean, Indian IT needs to have women CEOs as well. You know, we have MNCs are showing us the way, Capgemini, HP, Facebook. Do you think that's something that the Indian IT industry also needs to work on, encourage women leaders?
I think the Indian IT industry is already the largest employer of women among all the sectors, and it has perhaps a higher proportion of women in senior positions. I agree with you. There need to be more people in absolute leadership positions, but that is inevitable given these patterns. And considering the fact that it's ahead of every other sector, I think that's certainly something that one could hope to see in this sector as well.
Aruna, you think it's just a coincidence that the Indian IT companies, so to say, don't have women leaders, when a lot of the big MNCs, MNC IT companies in India do? Would you call it just a coincidence, or do you think there's more to it?
I know several strong women leaders within the Indian IT companies. I think they're probably at the next level, therefore you don't see them. But I think at the end of the day, we got to talk about good leaders, okay? And then the gender is secondary.
All right, there you have it. It's not the gender of the leaders, but the quality of the leaders that matters. That's the view from our panel, and we definitely have the leadership to take the Indian IT sector to the next $100 billion and much, much more. Out of time on this special telecast. Thanks so much for watching.